So I screwed up. I screwed up really bad. And so in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to turn a subpar HD shot into a pretty amazing 4K shot in DaVinci Resolve 16. So if I take a look at the clips that I have our clips from the GH5 right here, which are in full 4K, 400 megabytes a second. Just glorious. I mean, it just looks beautiful. It's crisp. The exposure is pretty much right where it needs to be for the skin tone. It's a little blown out outside, but I'm totally happy with it. And then if I go over to our 1DX Mark III shot, you can see that it's 1080 in 59.9 frames a second. And honestly, I have no clue how this even happened. Canon is the only kind of camera I've ever worked with that what you're looking at on the viewfinder on the back of the camera can be different than what it's actually recording to the SD card. I could have swore I double checked my camera settings and we were at 4K UHD in 23.9, but that's obviously not what ended up happening. So our front interview shot is underexposed. It's in 1080. The white balance looks a little off. I mean, everything that could have gone wrong with this shot pretty much went wrong. And because it's the main shot, every other shot I've got for this whole entire video, it's been about 3 or 4 shoots for this video project in particular. All the other shots are in 4K. They're all beautiful. So somehow I have to get this shot looking like all of those shots. And there's a couple ways to do this. So let me go ahead and check my project settings because I want to make sure that I'm pulling this into a 4K timeline. So if I go to File and then Project Settings, and we can see that we're at 4K 29.9. I'm fine with that. And we can move forward. That's all I really need to check is that this is in 4K in the frame rate that I'm looking for. And then I'll drag this into our media pool. And it's going to ask me if I want to change the frame rate because this is in 59.9 frames a second. And I'm going to say don't change. Let's just leave it how I have the project set to. And then I will go ahead and choose a spot within this clip and make some in and out points. So I'll hit I to make an endpoint right here. And then I'll go down a little further. And let's say I'll just skip down here. And whenever she quits talking, I'll hit O to make an endpoint. O to make an endpoint. And I'm not picking these in and out points for any specific reason. I'm just kind of, makeshifting for the tutorial. You guys make in and out points wherever you need. That has nothing to do with this process. So from here, I'll right click and then go to create new timeline using selected clips. And we should have ourselves a 4K timeline with our video already scaled up in it by default. And one thing you can do, there's a way to upscale within the program that actually works pretty well. And if I right click this shot and go to clip attributes, and this is really just for, if you're gonna go ahead and throw 1080 clips into a 4K timeline, you might as well do this anyway. And so if I come down here, you'll see it says super scale and I can hit this drop down menu. Now you'll need to know how many times you'll need to actually get this footage up. So if it was 720 or 480 even, or if it was 2K, then I might be in a different situation. But because this is 1080, I just need this to be 2 times for 1080p to be turned into 2160p. And then from here, you'll see the sharpening option. And this is set to medium. I'm gonna leave it there because I've tried to use high and it looks over sharpened. And any kind of sharpening, I would like to mainly do that myself. But I'll go with medium for here. I usually use medium or low depending on the shot. And then noise reduction, I'll leave it medium as well. And we'll hit OK. And right now you can see it looks pretty good, but I'm still seeing her skin looks pretty rough. If I just go to 100%, there's a bit of noise there in the background. Still, I can kind of see it dancing around. And obviously, this is not as sharp as a 4K shot should be. And so that's one way to do it. That's not really the way I like to do it. And this is the way that I personally like to do it. I'm actually going to hit Alt, hold Alt, and click this and drag it over to just copy this real fast. And then I'm going to come into this clip. I'm going to right click and I'm going to turn those clip attributes off that we just set. So I'm going to go to clip attributes again, and then I'll go ahead and turn this to none, no super scaling, and I'll hit OK. And so what I typically do if I'm in this situation, because there's another thing I'm not really sure about either. I know this is 1080. I know it's 60 frames a second. I meant to shoot it in 10-bit, but I'm guessing that it was shot in 8-bit. So that's another thing that I'm going to need to try to do as well, is try to get this to more of a 10-bit like format. And so I'm going to go ahead and go over to the color tab from here. So if you're using the studio version of DaVinci Resolve, this is the first thing you'll need to do. If you're not using the studio version, all the tips actually except for the noise reduction will still apply. But I like to do this noise reduction if I'm in this situation. And so from here in this first node, I'll go to 100% on the preview window. And then I'll come over to our noise reduction tab. And with the temporal noise reduction, I'll click this frames and I'll go to 4 frames just because the more frames, the better. I can even go to 5. And then I'll go to motion estimation type. I'll go to better. And then motion range. I'll just leave it medium because really she's not moving in this shot. And the camera's not moving either. And then from here, I'm going to delink our Luma and Chroma thresholds. And I'm going to move this Luma threshold up to maybe about 4.6. Let's go with 4.8. 4.8 is fine. And then I'll pull our chroma noise, which is pretty much our colored noise. I'll bring this up to something like 17, 18. I like to leave the Luma in between 2 and 8 max. It starts to look a little too smooth at about 8 or more. And then my chroma noise, I'll usually do between 14 and 30 even. So kind of work those ranges and see what works for your footage. But at this moment, this seems to have really smoothened some of that noise out. And I don't think we're losing any sharpness if I deactivate and then activate. I'm looking at her eyes because that's really where I don't want to lose any sharpness. I am noticing that the noise is being reduced in this background. You can see little granulars here. And then when I turn this on, so in the background, it's getting a little more smooth, but on her, it seems like we're just as sharp. And that's really what I'm going for. I kind of want to reduce the noise, and the noise reduction will also kind of blend the pixels together a little bit. Therefore, I can kick it out into a 10-bit format, and hopefully that'll help smoothen all this out when I go to color it and really sharpen things up. And so I'll go to the spatial noise reduction too, and I'll go to enhanced and then go to medium. And then let's kick this up to, let's just say I'm going to unlink these and I'll kick this up to maybe 2.8, not really much. And then the chroma noise, let's put this at like 12 or something. And again, let me check the sharpness on her eyes. That looks really good. I'm not really noticing any difference in the sharpness of her face right now, but I am definitely noticing a difference in the noise pattern in the background and the shadows. So that's perfect. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and kick this out into a 10-bit format. And I'm actually going to leave this other clip here because we're actually going to compare how the inbuilt super scaling does to this technique that I'm going to show you guys in this video when everything's said and done. So I'm going to go to delivery, and then I'm going to make an endpoint right here on the second clip because I really just want to export this one with that noise reduction. And then I'll name this Whitney interview rewrapped because that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. I'm kind of taking my file, noise reducing it, and then rewrapping it into a different file type, which that's going to be DNHR. I'm going to use a DNHR file type. And I'm just going to put this on the desktop for now just to make things easy. And then I'm going to come down to MXF OP1A. You could use, any ProRes or MOV, anything that you feel like will give you the highest quality and least compression, just because that'll make it easier to edit with, of course, something like a ProRes or a DNHR. So I'm going to go with the DNHR and then a DNHR HQX 10-bit. I'm not going to try to push the 12-bit. Let's just try to get the 10-bit and sharpen this up. I just need to save this clip as far as I'm concerned right now. And so from here, the rest of the settings are good. I can go ahead and add to render queue and then start render. And I'll go ahead and let this kick out and then we'll go on to the color grading. So another option if you do not have the studio version and access to the noise reduction is if you right click the clip and go to clip attributes, and you do turn the super scaling on and then go to noise reduction and set it to high. And then you kick that file out as a 10-bit ProRes or DNHR. That could give you the same kind of results as what I just did. You won't be able to fine tune as much, obviously, because you're kind of letting the program do it for you. But it is an option if you are using the free version and you still need this technique, because I mean, we've all been there, especially if you're just starting out. In the beginning of my video career, I can't tell you how many times I had to save a clip or two in almost, it seemed like, every shoot I had. So now that we have that file on the desktop, I'm gonna go ahead and go over to my desktop and grab that and bring it into our project that we have here. And I'll go ahead and make a new timeline using that clip that we exported. And now that we have our new timeline, you know, let's say I had this in a multicam with my GH5 clip that actually looks awesome. I could go on and color this to try to match. And so let's see how well I can get this looking like 4K again. Quality of the color and the sharpness and everything. And so if I come over to our color tab, and let's say I hit Alt-S to make a new node, and we throw a LUT on here. I'm going to go to the LUTs. I'm going to right-click this, go to LUTs, and 1D LUT input. I'm going to go to the Canon log to Rec 709. Now, this is because I was recording in C-Log on the 1DX Mark III. You would use whatever LUT worked best for the footage that you were using, or if you weren't recording in log, then you wouldn't need to use a LUT at all, and you could just kind of go on with the steps as followed from here. So looking at the white balance, if we go ahead and take a look at the white balance right off the bat, let me go ahead and expand this, and I'll bring it over to our image here. So what we're looking at is we've got this pillow to the far right. This little shaggy pillow thing is to the far right. And we can already see that, you know, red, green, and blue on a level equal scale makes white. So by this being off, by the green being a little less than the red and the blue being a little less than the green, we can clearly see in the scopes that our white balance is off, as well as, you know, just looking at it, we can see that it's a little warmer than white normally would be. And then if we keep looking forward, look through this image, we'll see, and we move to the left, we'll see that this little lower spot here is actually her shirt. And then the rest of this would be her in the frame, her hair and her skin, and this would be her shirt. And then over here would kind of be this table in the shadowy section. And then over here we see the lamp. So we can kind of identify where things are. And again, these little lower parts where the shirt I just pointed out was, these aren't level either. And black should also be level equally as much green, red, and blue. So we'll need to fix that as well moving forward. And I'm going to go ahead and go over to the primaries bars, and we can start white balancing this out. Let me close this to give us some more space. So from here, if I were just to change some of these attributes, if we look at the scopes as I move this blue gain up, you'll see that the other, the red and the green also change. And so to get this to just move the blue independently, we'll just need to turn the Loom Mix down right here at the bottom of the program. And then from here, I can actually go into this blue gain and try to match it where the red gain is in the scopes. That's looking pretty good. And then you'll see that it's also raising the lows as well. So I can actually go to the lift and I can pull this back down. And a lot of this is kind of massaging the image. We kind of want to take it one step at a time, kind of massaging the image back to where it needs to be. And then I'll need to do the same thing with the blue highlights again. Pull these back up. And then I'll come back to the blue lift, which is the shadows of the blue. And I can bring this down to about there. And I'll do the same thing with the green. In the green gain, I'll go ahead and pull this up a bit. And then I can go over to the lift, the green and the lift. Pull this down just slightly. It's not too far off from where it needs to be. That is pretty nice. And I can pull the blue down a little bit more as well. And I kind of like that right there. That to me feels like a really good starting place. If I deactivate this node and then activate, deactivate, activate, you can already see that our colors are much more separated now. Her skin is a different color than her hair. This pillar back here on the stairs is white. the pillow, the shaggy pillow, blanket, whatever that was, it's now white. And I could fine tune this a little more. Let me bring the blue back up slightly, just about right here. And maybe the blue gamma, I could raise that a little bit. Yeah, and the green, pull that to about here. And this to me is a fine starting point. Is it perfect? No, I don't think it's perfect, but it's a great starting point. And from here, I can actually go after the LUT, and we can start doing a little bit of relighting, which will really help this image out quite a bit also. And I'm gonna hit Alt-P with this last node selected to make a couple parallel nodes. I'll hit Alt-P again, and so now we have 3 parallel nodes for our relighting. And this is where we'll really start adding more detail back into the shot. And so if I go to our qualifier and hit our highlight button so we can see what gets qualified, I'll go to the low of the luminance and I'll drag this up until we really just see kind of the highlights of a little bit of everything. So we kind of want a little of the highlights of her skin, we want the highlights of her hair, but we also, want this pillow, which we're probably not going to be able to make that work. So let's just kind of come to about here where we've got the skin, and then I'll go to the L soft, the low soft, and soften this up a tad. And maybe I'll push the low up a little more, and then soften a little more, and pull it up just to about right here. That looks good. And then I'll go to the denoise, and I'll move this up a little bit. Because you can see here, if I turn the denoise off, we've got some really granular qualification here, and it's kind of splotchy. And if I make any changes to our qualified area, you'll be able to see those little granules in there. So by pulling this denoise up, it'll kind of get rid of those, and then we'll go down this blur radius and we'll blur a little bit also. And that should be good right there. And then I'll hit the highlight off. And then in our primaries bars, we can actually raise this gain a little bit, and then even raise the gamma a tad also. And then I'm actually going to come to the midtone detail. So if you press this number 2 in the bottom left-hand corner, it'll take us to the second menu of options. And I can go to the midtone details and just turn this down a little bit, which will soften those highlights. Let me zoom in here so you can kind of see the difference. If I take this back to 0, and if I were to even turn this up, you'll see how it's kind of popping a little more in the highlights. I kind of want to turn that down to soften those highlights a little bit. And then if I deactivate that node and activate, deactivate, activate, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good for now. And then I'll go to this next parallel node, and I'm going to make a power window by hitting the circle button here. So it'll take us to our power window menu, and I'll hit a circle or ellipse, whatever you like to call it. And I'll make this a little bigger. I'll soften it a good bit because here I kind of want to make a vignette around the edges, but more so on this side over here. So I'm actually going to stretch this out long ways, and then soften, soften, soften. And I'll hit the highlight button to see what's qualified. And I can make this a little smaller even, and a little softer. And then I'm gonna hit the invert button next to our circular power window to invert that. That way I get more of this outside area. Now I can come in here, and I'm going to go to the primaries wheels. To me, the primaries wheels is the least destructive as far as, if I move these highlights up, it does a really good job of rolling the highlights really well. So I like to use the primaries wheels for small adjustments, especially when I'm trying to massage an image to make it look better, because I don't want the image to fall apart on me. So let me get into 100% here so we can see what's going on. And I'll go to our gamma and I'll turn this down a little. And I'll go to our lift and I'll turn that down a little also. Not too much, just a tad. And then maybe a little more. And then I'll go to our gain and I'll turn that down a little bit. And if I deactivate, boom, I like that. But one thing I would like to do is kind of move it over a little more because there really shouldn't be much shadow over here. You can tell there's a light coming from over there. So to make this look a little more realistic, I can move this like this. We're just getting this edge over here. This will help add some drama. And already, if I deactivate this whole node tree, I mean, we've done quite a bit. And if I deactivate everything but the LUT, let's say, I mean, that is a pretty drastic difference. And so if I keep moving on, I'm going to hit Alt. Actually, let's go to this next parallel node. And what I'm going to do from here is make one more power window, circular power window here. And I'll make it a good bit bigger. And I'll kind of put it in the same position we had the other one, but we're not going to invert this one. Soften it a good bit. Let me hit the highlight button so we can see what we're working with here. And then I'm actually going to go to the qualifier and I'm going to move these lows up in the luminance so we can just get the highlights again. About right here. I want barely the highlights of her face, just barely. So I'll soften that low point, denoise a little bit, blur a tad, maybe bring it up a little more. About there is probably fine. And then from here, I actually want to push a little warmth into the shot. So I might actually just go to the temperature and pull this over just a little to the right to give us a little bit of warmth back in the shot, just on this side of the image. And maybe I'll even go to the gain of our primaries wheels. And let's see. I'm going to actually push this a little towards the blue. And if I deactivate, you can barely see that, but it's just a little pop of warmth, almost in the lower highlights. And it really kind of helps. And then I'm actually going to go to the overall gain wheel here and pull these highlights up even a little more to make her pop a little more. Deactivate, activated, deactivated, activated. I think that looks pretty good. And then moving forward, I can also add some color contrast, which will really smoothen out the overall look of the image in itself. And so if I go down to the log wheels and move our shadows just a little bit into the blues, just a tiny bit, not too much. I kind of just want to see her shirt get a little on the blue side, just a tiny bit. Deactivate, activate it. That's enough. That's barely anything. You can see a little more blue in the shadows back here. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring more unity. Back here, there's a lot of colors going on. If I deactivate this, you know, the walls, like this beige thing, you've got this white pillar here in the door frame. You've got, it looks like a pink blanket she has on this bed back here. And then I can't even tell what color. This thing is like a purplish, bluish. It's totally in the shadows. So it's a very cool color. So you're kind of just getting a lot of different colors in these shadows, and it helps to unify that by turning this on, and we've got our log wheels that's kind of just throwing like a little bit more of a blue cast in all those shadows, kind of just smoothing out that whole section over there. And then I can come to the midtones, push these a little over towards the orange a little bit. Let's see here. More towards the yellow than the orange. If I deactivate and then activate, see how smooth it is? There's kind of just this nice, kind of this warm tone on her, this cool tone on the back, but then we still have the white of the highlights from this blanket here. I deactivate, activate. I hope you guys can see that little subtle difference there. And then moving on, I want to add a little bit more contrast, and then we're going to sharpen this to look really good. So if I come down to the curves, and we can see that we kind of have our highlights and midtones about right here, and then our shadows down here. So I'm going to make a point kind of in the middle of this lower section and make a point down here towards the shadows, and then pull this down a little bit. I may even make a point a little higher and then get rid of this first point we made, so we get a little bit more contrast. Now it's looking a lot better. And now you guys kind of see that there's kind of a process here. And in the beginning, it may have seemed like, where's he going with this? What's going on here? Does the image look great? I can't really tell. But it's really, you're going for an end result. None of these are made to make the image look good just on that node. You know, they're all kind of a team effort. Teamwork makes the dream work. And so this contrast alone made quite a difference. And now we can make a point towards the top of the curves, and I'll actually pull this up a little bit. And in this video, she's actually talking about a pretty tragic accident that she had. So if you're wondering why I've chosen to do such a dramatic kind of color grade, it's not just to save the footage. It's because for this project, she's talking about something pretty intense and pretty traumatic. And then from here, one more thing I'm going to do is soften by going into our midtone details, because you can see it's kind of splotchy on her skin and splotchy up here a little bit, just because there wasn't the information there. And you're going to kind of find that some things fall apart a little bit when you try to make 1080 into 4K, because the information is just not there and the computer's trying to fake it. But you know, we can use a little softening here. If I just minus this midtone details, it'll also help with some of these harder highlights that I made. If I just pull this down to about here, that looks good. And plus, girls love it when you make them look like they have the smoothest skin on the world. Now, there's a fine line and you don't want to overdo it, but trust me. So from here, we've softened a good bit. We've got a pretty good look going on, and now it's time to sharpen. So I'm going to make one more node, which might turn into two more nodes. You never know. Let's see what happens. And I'm going to go to our blur/sharpening menu here and go to this blur drop-down menu, go to sharpen, and then from here, let me zoom in just to 100%, and I'm really going to focus on her eyes here. And if I pull this radius down to maybe 48, and then before, after, before, after, before, after, now that's nice. It's really done a lot for the hair. If you see, this is with it off. You can see how soft the hair is, just a little soft. And then turn that on, and you're really seeing it up here too. Off, on, off, on, off, on. And in her eyes, that's nice. So that's it for that node. That's honestly it. I'm going to make one more, and I'm going to go into the sharpening, turn the scaling down to about 19. Sharpening is pretty much making the lines more contrasted. The program is pretty much finding the lines and turning up the contrast to make sharpness. And the scaling is just asking you, how big of lines do you want it to pay attention to? So if I have it up here at 51 and I turn this down, you see that it's sharpening everything in the image. Everything. I mean, the pillow, the couch, her hair, her skin, everything in the image gets sharpened because it's looking for, it's got a pretty big big size of contrast that it's looking for. So if I turn this down to, by default it's at 25, if I turn this down to, let's say 19, and then we go into that 100%, and then I turn this radius down to about 47, you'll really only see it in her hair and maybe her lips and her eyes, and maybe some of the specks on her skin. If I deactivate, activate, deactivate, activate, yeah, that's nice. And I can actually make this probably 18. Scaling 18, and then the radius down to 47. And that makes a pretty drastic difference. Now if I full screen this and we watch it back, that looks so much more like 4K. I mean, come on. Come on. And we're not done yet, but I just got one more thing to do. I'm just going to add in a little more contrast, which this is purely preference. I'm going to make this a little brighter because at this point, we've kind of smoothened everything out. We've taken care of the noise. We've taken care of the sharpness. We've taken care of the color tones. So at this point, now that we've smoothened everything out, you can see that by raising the contrast, it's not pulling the image apart anymore. And that is pretty stinking incredible. If I deactivate everything but the LUT, that's what we're looking at. That's the shot with the LUT on. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why you don't just throw a LUT on, by the way. Look at that. Come on now, people. That's captivating. I want to see what she has to say. So let me go back and let's compare this to our other shot. So if I just go ahead and copy this whole thing, I go back to timeline 1, scoot this to the side, copy this in here. I've got this shot and I've got our one that we scaled already. So if I go to color and I go over to clips so we can see our clips in the timeline, I can click on our clip that we scaled using the in-program scaling, and then I'll hit my mouse wheel in to copy that node tree over from this other one here. And let's go back to the edit tab, make this a little bigger, and let's try to compare these. Oh yeah, this looks like crap already. This looks like crap already. I mean, this is the one that we scaled within the program, and the background still looks noisy. Even though we had the noise reduction on the medium, it doesn't really look that sharp. We're at 100% right now. Look at her eyes and how it almost looks like a video compared to this one here. Now this, that's night and day difference to the in-program scaling and how we went about scaling it on our own. Yes, I love that. And if you guys learned anything from this video at all, make sure to hit that like button. It'll really help the channel out. And definitely if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, leave them down below in the comment section. I typically always reply. You guys are blowing up the comments lately, and I really appreciate it. I'm trying to stay on top of all of them. If I don't get to your comment, I'm very sorry. Give me a little time. I try to get to all of them. And make sure to subscribe if you like videos on DaVinci Resolve. And as always, guys, I'm Marcel, and this has been The Modern Filmmaker, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace!